Some stories are better heard with someone else. But you're here alone. Welcome to Don't Listen Alone. This is 100% ad-free, just you and whatever comes next. Drop your location and the time before we begin. Now, listen carefully. Not everything you hear is part of the story. My first real experience with something I could not explain happened way back when I was still in elementary school, and every time I think about it, I can still clearly picture the house, the sounds, and the feeling in my chest that night, even though so many years have already passed. I was around 8 years old at that time, old enough to know the difference between a dream and being awake, but still young enough to be innocent and easily excited about the smallest things. We were living in Cebu City then, in my grandparents' house, in a subdivision that was still very new. There were only a few houses built on our street, and a lot of empty lots still waiting for construction, so there were no neighborhood kids I could play with yet. I was an only child in an extended family, surrounded by adults most of the time, and even though I was loved and cared for, I still felt lonely sometimes because I didn't have anyone my age around to share games and secrets with. That was why I got extremely happy when my second-degree cousin Kaylee and her grandmother, my grandmother's sister whom we all called Lola Anita, came to our house to spend a vacation with us for a couple of weeks. Kaylee lived in Bohol, and because of the distance we only saw each other once in a while at rare family occasions, but wherever we were together it always felt like we were sisters, not just cousins. We clicked easily. We liked the same simple games, we laughed at the same jokes, and we never ran out of silly stories to tell each other. When I heard they were coming to Cebu to stay with us, I was so excited that I kept asking my Lola when they would arrive, looking out the window every now and then to see if I could already spot them. When they finally arrived, pulling in with their bags and warm smiles, my days suddenly felt full and lively. From the moment Kaylee got there, we played almost non-stop. We ran around the house, invented games, shared toys, and explored every corner of the place as if we were on a small adventure. Having her around changed the usual quiet rhythm of my days. Instead of sitting alone or watching TV by myself, I suddenly had a partner to share everything with. Even the simplest things became fun, like eating snacks together, whispering before sleeping, or taking turns using the bathroom. The house, which before felt too big and a little too quiet most of the time, suddenly felt warmer and more alive with the sound of our giggles and footsteps. One of the things that made our house special was that it still had a poso, a hand pump that was the source of our water in the yard, something very common in the Philippines. Instead of turning on a faucet like in modern houses, you had to pump the handle up and down to draw water from the ground. Many people, especially older ones or those used to traditional ways, still did hand washing for clothes rather than using a washing machine. And when someone was washing clothes by hand, especially something thick like jeans or pants, you could clearly hear the swishing and brushing sound as they scrubbed the fabric against the washboard or their hands. I grew up with that sound. To me it belonged to mornings or afternoons, when the sun was out and people were busy with chores. It was not something you ever heard late at night when everyone was supposed to be asleep. During the day, Kaylee and I played so much that by evening we were usually exhausted, but we still liked to squeeze out as much fun as we could before sleeping. One particular night, after a long day of running, talking, and laughing, we decided that we wanted to sleep together in the living room instead of in our usual rooms. We chose the living room because that way we could watch TV until we got sleepy, and it felt a little like a mini sleepover, just the two of us lying on blankets on the floor. My grandparents allowed it. We prepared our pillows and blankets, and set them up where we could comfortably see the television. The lights in the rest of the house were already off or dimmed, but the glow of the TV kept the living room bright enough for us to feel safe and cozy. Kaylee fell asleep first. She was lying beside me, breathing softly, her face relaxed in that peaceful way children sleep when they have had a full day. I stayed awake a little longer, watching the show Bebo Na on TV. My eyes were starting to feel heavy, and I knew I was close to dozing off, but I wanted to finish the episode or at least watch a bit more before turning off the television. As I lay there, half watching the screen and half listening to the sounds around the house, something strange suddenly caught my attention. I heard a sound that I immediately recognized, a very familiar noise, the sound of someone brushing clothes. It was exactly like the steady, rhythmic sound of someone hand-washing pants, the cloth being scrubbed and rubbed, the water splashing as the fabric was soaked and lifted. At first, I thought my ears were playing a trick on me, or that maybe it was coming from the TV, so I listened more carefully. But as I focused on it, I realized the sound was not coming from the television at all. It was coming from outside, near the area of the pozo. I froze for a moment, confused. It was already around 11:30 p.m. by then, late enough that everyone in the house and probably everyone in the neighborhood should already be asleep. It was impossible, at least in my mind, for anyone to be out there washing clothes at that hour. Laundry, especially heavy pieces like pants, was never done that late. The later it got, the stranger the sound felt. I turned my head a little, trying not to move too much and wake Kaylee, and I listened as carefully as I could. The more I focused, the clearer and louder the swishing and brushing became, as if whoever was washing was putting more and more force into scrubbing. It did not fade. It grew even stronger, sharper, almost urgent. My heart started to beat a little faster. I got up enough courage to wake Kaylee. I gently shook her and whispered her name until she opened her eyes, sleepy and confused. I told her, "Listen, do you hear that?" At first she just stared at me, but then she quieted down and listened too. After a moment, she nodded and said that yes, she could hear it. Trying to stay calm, she suggested that maybe there was someone in the pozo area washing clothes, like a neighbor or another relative. "Maybe there's someone in the pozo washing clothes," she said, as if it might just be something normal. I shook my head and told her, "It's impossible. Everyone's asleep and we're the only people here." I knew the sleeping arrangements in the house. My grandparents were already in their room, and the other adults in the house had long since gone to bed. The subdivision was quiet at that hour. No one was out doing chores anymore. We both became quiet and just sat there, listening. The sound did not go away. If anything, it continued to grow louder, more intense, as if the invisible person outside was in a hurry to finish the laundry as fast as possible. Along with the brushing and scrubbing, we started hearing the pozo itself being pumped more forcefully, the metal handle rising and falling with quick, strong movements. It was as if somebody had both hands on it, pumping harder and harder, pulling water up at a frantic pace. The regular, slow, clunk clunk we were used to hearing during daytime had turned into a fast, even aggressive rhythm. The clearer it became, the more terrified I felt. My cousin, trying to be braver than she probably felt, suggested that we take a peek out the window to see who it was. The window in the living room faced the same side of the house as the pozo, so if we had looked out, we probably could have seen the area clearly. When she suggested it, my whole body reacted with fear. The idea of looking out that window and possibly seeing something that was not human scared me more than just hearing the sound itself. I imagined what might be there, shapes or figures bent over the water pump in the dark, and I could not bear the thought. Without even needing to think long, I refused right away. "No way," I told her. I knew that if I saw something outside, I might never forget it. Instead of going to the window, we both decided that we needed an adult. Our fear had already reached the point where we were shaking. So we did the only thing that made sense to us. We got up from our bedding, and we ran straight to my grandparents' bedroom. As we ran, we were already screaming, calling out for my Lola, desperate for her to wake up and save us from whatever was out there. We burst into their room, and my Lola, startled, woke up and tried to calm us down. Between breaths and frightened words, we told her about the sound we had heard, about the brushing in the water, and how it had gotten louder and louder. We explained that we were sure it was coming from the pozo area. My Lola listened but told us that she hadn't heard anything at all. Here's the strange part. The window of my grandparents' room also faced the pozo, just like the window in the living room. Their room was on the same side of the house, and their windows were open that night because of the heat. So if there had been someone loudly washing clothes and pumping water like that outside, she should have heard it even clearer than we did. But she insisted there had been nothing, No sound that had woken her up, no noise of water or brushing, only our sudden screaming. Seeing how frightened we were, though, she did not scold us for waking her. Instead, she told us to stay with her and my Lolo for the rest of the night. She understood that whatever we had heard had shaken us badly, and she did not want to send us back to the living room where we no longer felt safe. So we climbed into their bed, still trembling, and tried our best to sleep, comforted by their presence and the feeling that we were no longer alone. After that night, we never slept in the living room again. The spot that once felt fun and cozy because of the TV and the open space now felt too exposed, too close to the pozo, and too connected to that strange sound that no one else had heard. My cousin eventually went back to Bohol with her grandmother when their vacation was over, but that memory stayed with me. And as the years passed, I came to realize that that incident was not the only scary event that had happened in our house. There were other stories, other moments, things seen and heard and felt in different parts of the home. One day, my Lola Anita told us something that made all those creepy experiences feel even more connected. She said that long before my grandparents bought the lot and built our house there used to be a big mango tree standing exactly where our house now stood. The tree had been cut down when my grandparents decided to buy the property and construct the house, clearing the land to make way for the foundation and walls. According to her, there may have been elementals, nature spirits, or unseen beings living in or around that mango tree, and when the tree was cut and the house was built, those beings did not simply vanish. Instead, she believed they might have stayed, shifting from the tree to the house, sharing the space with us quietly. When she said that, a shiver ran down my spine. I imagined unseen eyes watching us play in the yard, listening to us talk in the living room, and maybe using the pozo late at night when everyone else was asleep. Whether or not it is true in a scientific sense, I cannot say, but in my heart, that explanation made a strange kind of sense. It was creepy, yes, but it also made me feel like what we had heard was not just random. There was a story behind the land the house was built on, a long history that extended back before I was even born, and the sounds and feelings we could not explain might belong to that older, invisible part of that history that continues to live with us quietly, just out of sight. In the summer of 2011, I traveled with my uncle back to the United States, because he was already living there at that time in a city called Dubuque in the state of Iowa, and he wanted some company on the long trip home. I stayed with him and his family for about a week, enjoying the quiet life there, the usual family routines, and just adjusting to the time difference, before it was time for me to head back to Cebu in the Philippines. Since I had flown all that way and already had my vacation approved, I thought that it would be a waste to simply fly home without seeing anything new, so I decided to extend my return trip by a few more days and visit Chicago, a city I had heard a lot about but never really experienced for myself. I had been to the United States several times in the past for different reasons, but this was my first time going to Chicago, and I was very excited about it because I already had two main things in mind that I wanted to enjoy while I was there: baseball and food. I imagined eating different kinds of American food, trying out famous places, and of course going to a real game and feeling the atmosphere in the stadium. I booked a room at the Congress Plaza Hotel largely because of practicality. I had checked the location on the map and seen that it was in a convenient spot, close to the trains and subways that would make it easy for me to get around the city. It was important to me that I could reach the ballpark easily, since I planned to catch a Chicago White Sox game at Comiskey Park, and I also wanted a simple route to O'Hare Airport when it was finally time for me to fly home. The room rates there were also reasonable compared to some of the other hotels in that area, and since I was traveling alone and paying for the trip myself, that was a big factor. I did not think much about anything else. I was not looking for luxury, just a place that was accessible, safe, and comfortable enough for a few nights. When I arrived at the Congress Plaza Hotel, I noticed right away that it was the kind of place where you can feel its age as soon as you step inside. The architecture and the style of the interior made it clear that it was an old hotel, one that had probably seen thousands of guests and many decades pass by. The floors and walls had that worn but dignified look, and in some areas, if you listened carefully while walking, you could hear faint creaks, as if the building itself was settling and shifting under the weight of time. It was not modern and sleek like newer hotels. Instead, it felt a little mysterious, the kind of place that carried stories in its corners. I did not immediately think of ghosts or anything like that. To me, it was just an old building with character. The room that I was assigned to was located, if I remember correctly, on the 4th floor. It was a corner room, which meant that it had a bit of a special feel compared to rooms that were just lined up in the middle of the hallway. When I looked out the window, I could see Roosevelt University along East Congress Parkway, the street below filled with cars and people going about their business during the day. The view made me feel like I was really in the heart of a big city, with tall buildings, busy roads, and the constant movement of urban life. However, the hallway outside my room was noticeably different from the lively scene outside the window. Each time I walked from the elevator to my room, I felt that the hallway was always eerily quiet. Sometimes I would be the only person walking down that long strip of carpet, the walls lined with doors that all looked the same, and the silence felt heavy, as if the sound was being absorbed by the walls. There were no voices of other guests, no footsteps except my own, no laughter or noise spilling out from other rooms. The lighting was normal, not too dim, but the lack of sound made the hallway feel a bit unsettling, like a scene from a movie where something might suddenly appear at the end without warning. On the first night of my stay, I went out to explore a little, found something to eat, and soaked in the feeling of being in Chicago for the first time. It felt exciting to be walking in a new city, seeing buildings and signs I had only heard about before, and knowing that the next few days were mine to spend as I liked. After dinner, I returned to the hotel feeling satisfied and a bit tired from the travel and walking. When I got back to my room and closed the door behind me, I expected the usual feeling of normalcy that comes with settling into a hotel room for the night. Instead, something strange happened. The room suddenly became very cold. It was not the kind of coolness that slowly creeps in when the air conditioning gradually works. It was a sudden drop in temperature, like someone had switched on a blast of cold air out of nowhere. I found this very strange because outside, the weather had been nice and warm, typical for that time of the year. I had not turned the air conditioner to an unusually low temperature, and nothing in my settings explained why the room would feel that cold. It was as if I had stepped into a refrigerator. The chill went beyond just comfort. I actually felt like I was freezing. I ended up putting on more layers than I usually would. I used the bed sheet, then the blanket, and even pulled the bed cover over myself, trying to trap as much warmth as possible around my body. I remember feeling puzzled as I lay there trying to sleep, wondering why it had turned so cold all of a sudden when there had been no reason for it. What made it even stranger was that this extreme cold only happened that one night. For the rest of my stay at the hotel, the room felt quite warm, sometimes even a little too warm, like you would expect in a building that old during that time of the year. The sudden cold did not repeat itself, so it remained a single, unexplained incident in my mind. During the days, I did what I had planned to do. I woke up, went out, explored the city, walked around, found good places to eat, and visited some of the sights I had always wanted to see. I was away from the hotel most of the time, only really coming back after dinner when my legs were tired and I was ready to lie down and rest. Every time I returned to my room, however, I began to notice something that was odd and hard to ignore. Some of my belongings had been moved around. At first, I did not think much of it. I told myself that it was probably just the hotel staff, maybe the cleaners or housekeepers who came in during the day to tidy the room while I was gone. Perhaps they had shifted things around a bit while dusting or changing the sheets. That was a normal idea, and I did not feel alarmed. But the more it happened, the stranger it felt. I would leave something in a particular spot, like a small item on the table or my things arranged in a certain way, and when I came back, they would be in a slightly different position, as if someone had picked them up, looked at them, and put them back down, not exactly how I had left them. To test whether it was the cleaners or not, I decided to hang a Do Not Disturb sign outside my door. That way, no one from housekeeping would come in while I was gone, and I would be able to see if the movement of my things stopped. I left for the day, did my usual exploring, and returned in the evening expecting everything to be exactly where I had left it. To my surprise, even with the do not disturb sign on the door, I still found that some of my stuff had been moved. Nothing was missing, which was a relief. My money, my documents, and my personal belongings were all accounted for. But small things would be slightly out of place, shifted from their original positions just enough for me to notice. It was not like someone had ransacked my room or gone through my suitcase aggressively. Instead, it felt more like a curious hand had simply touched and examined things, then kept them there in almost the same spot. It was subtle, but when you are alone and you know your own habits, you can tell immediately when something is not quite right. I began to feel uneasy, but I still tried to explain it away. Maybe I had moved things in a hurry without remembering. Maybe I had been more tired than I thought and simply forgotten doing it. I told myself these little excuses because they were easier to accept than the idea that something unseen was inside the room with me while I was gone. Before my trip, I had already heard rumors that the Congress Plaza Hotel was supposedly haunted. People talk, both online and in person, and the stories about this particular hotel came up a few times while I was planning my stay. At first, I treated them as curiosities, the kind of thing that adds color to an old building's history but does not really affect you personally. Hearing about a haunted place is different from experiencing anything yourself. But what really made those rumors feel real to me, what really validated them in my mind, was an experience I had one night that I still remember very clearly. At the foot of my bed, there was a dresser with a fairly large mirror attached to it. The mirror was positioned in such a way that, when I lay on the bed and looked toward the dresser, I could see a reflection that included part of the room behind me, including the bathroom door. The bathroom door in my room was slightly ajar that night, not completely closed but not wide open either, and the lights inside the bathroom were turned off, so the space beyond the door looked dark. I was lying in bed, relaxed, and thinking about my day. I had visited the Field Museum earlier, one of Chicago's famous attractions, and I was replaying some of the things I had seen there in my head, the displays, the exhibits, the skeletons of ancient creatures, and all the little details that museums are full of. As I lay there recalling those memories, something in the mirror caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a trick of my tired mind, or a shadow cast by some object in the room, but then I really looked at it, and realized that what I was seeing did not match anything I could logically explain. In the mirror, reflected clearly, there was a shadow figure peeking out from behind the bathroom door. The door itself was slightly open, and from that gap, a shape was leaning out, as if trying to look into the room. The lights inside the bathroom were off, so it was naturally dark in there, but this shadow figure was darker than the darkness inside the bathroom. It was a distinct human shape, solid and clearly outlined against the rest of the shadowed area. It looked like a person standing just inside the bathroom, leaning forward slightly to peek through the gap in the door, watching the room, and watching me. I stared at the reflection for what felt like a long time. I do not know exactly how many seconds or minutes passed, but in that moment it felt like time had stretched. I focused on the figure, trying to make sense of it. I could see the head, the shoulders, the general outline of a body, but there were no details, no face, no clothing, nothing I could describe beyond its pure black shape. Where a face should have been, there was only solid darkness. Despite that, I had the strong feeling that it was aware of me, that it was observing me in return, that I was not just looking at an empty shape but at something with a presence, something that had chosen to reveal itself in that way. I blinked several times, half hoping that the image would vanish and prove that it had only been in my imagination. But every time I opened my eyes again, the figure was still there in the reflection, in the exact same position, peeking out of the dark bathroom, darker than the shadows around it. My heart was pounding, and some instinct inside me told me that I should ignore it, turn away, and just go to sleep, but another part of me felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. I wanted to know if it would still be there if I looked at it directly, and not just through the mirror. Acting on that impulse, I threw off the blanket, got out of bed, and walked toward the bathroom door. Honestly, I am not sure what I was thinking in that moment. Part of me was scared, but another part kept pushing me to confront whatever it was, as if seeing it face to face would somehow make things clearer. I moved slowly but steadily, my eyes focused on the bathroom door, expecting to see the shape standing there. When I reached the door and looked inside, there was nothing. The bathroom was empty. The darkness was just ordinary darkness, the kind created by a room with its lights turned off. There was no figure, no shadow that did not belong, no movement waiting for me. Everything looked normal. I felt both relieved and unsettled. I turned around, went back to the bed, and lay down again, then glanced at the mirror one more time, half expecting to see the figure reappear in the reflection. But this time, the mirror showed only the room and the slightly open bathroom door with its regular shadows. The shadow figure was gone. That was the moment when all the little things I had experienced during my stay, the sudden cold on the first night, the moved belongings, the quiet hallway, and now the solid shadow peeking from the bathroom, came together in my mind. I could no longer just brush it all off as coincidence or tiredness. I knew then that there was something in that hotel that could not be fully explained, something that seemed to be aware of the people staying there. I finished my trip, enjoyed the rest of my time in Chicago as best as I could, and eventually headed home. But that experience in the Congress Plaza Hotel stayed with me. Even now, when I think of Chicago, I remember not only the Field Museum, the baseball games, and the food, but also that quiet old room, the cold night, and the shadow that watched me from the bathroom door. These experiences happened in our previous house, and whenever I think about that place I still feel a tight pull in my chest because, for me, it was the only place I could ever truly call my home, the place where my memories grew layer by layer as I got older, the place that seemed to watch me as much as I watched it. My parents sold that house 5 years ago, and back then they had their reasons, but I was too young or maybe too attached to really understand why they had to let it go, and only now, as I look back and remember all the strange, unexplainable things that happened there, I start to think that maybe the house itself, with everything living in it, visible and invisible, was part of the reason, even if no one says it out loud. The house was built when I was just 3 months old, in an old subdivision in Iloilo City. My parents told me that they decided to build a house of their own because I was born, as if my arrival into the world pushed them to plant something permanent into the ground, a real home with walls and a roof and rooms that would be ours. Our neighbors, who had already been there long before us, would often say that they saw me and the house as somehow connected. They liked to joke and also half believe that as I grew up, the house grew with me, not in physical size, because the walls did not stretch and the roof did not rise, but in maturity and in presence, like I was feeding the house with my life and it was feeding me back with its energy. It sounded like superstition, but sometimes when I walked through the rooms, especially later at night, I really did feel like the house was more than just cement and wood, that it knew me and watched me and responded to my moods. Our neighbors also used to tell us that our lot, out of all the lots in the subdivision, was one of the scariest ones. The older people in the neighborhood, the ones who had lived there years before my parents ever thought of buying that piece of land, would share stories about how, back when our lot was still empty and wild, just a patch of ground with grass and maybe a tree or two, they would often see what they called falling stars, coming down and seeming to hit that particular spot. They were not talking about ordinary shooting stars in the sky that you just look at and make wishes on. These falling stars looked like small lights that came down low and seemed to land in the exact area where our house would later be built, and it happened not just once but again and again, often enough that it stayed in their memories. They believed, and told my parents, and told me as I grew old enough to listen, that these falling stars were not really stars at all but spirits or elementals coming down to that piece of land, choosing it, maybe living there. What struck me was that their stories were so consistent. Different neighbors, different houses, different families, but when they talked about that time and that land, they all said the same thing, as if the whole community had agreed on the story and was now passing it on to us. As a child, I found those stories both creepy and fascinating. I did not know whether to be scared or proud that our lot had such a reputation, and because I was born almost at the same time the house was built, I always felt like the house and those unseen things in the land were tied to me in some way. When I was little, I shared a room with my nanny. The house originally had 3 bedrooms. Our room was the middle one, and it was parallel to both my parents' room and my older sister's room. If you stood facing the door of my room from the hallway, my parents' room was to the left, and my sister's room was to the right. Inside, it was arranged in an unusual way. My room and my parents' room were not completely separated by a thick, solid wall like you would normally expect. Instead, there was just a divider between them, something that could block sight but did not fully block sound, so basically you could lie on your bed and talk to someone on the other side. You could hear movements, voices, and even soft whispers through that divider. At first, it just seemed like a practical arrangement, nothing special, but later on, that thin divider would become important to the strange things that happened in that house. When I was a kid, I was a nervous sleeper. Almost every night I would have nightmares. Maybe it was because of the things I watched on television, maybe scary shows or horror movies that stuck in my mind even after I turned off the TV, or maybe it was something else entirely, something in the house that slipped into my dreams. But I almost always woke up in the middle of the night crying, my heart pounding, my clothes sticking to my skin because I was soaked in sweat. Even though my nanny slept in the same room on the other bed right beside mine, and she would wake up and try to comfort me, I usually did not calm down until I went and knocked on my parents' bedroom door. The strange thing was that I almost never chose to fall asleep between my mom and dad, even when they allowed me into their bed. Instead, I always picked the side of the bed that allowed me to press my body against the wall. I needed to feel that solid surface against my back or my side, as if I wanted something firm and unmoving behind me so that whatever I was afraid of could not sneak up from there. Only when I felt the coolness of the wall and the familiar smell of my parents' room would I finally relax and drift back into sleep. It was like I trusted the house enough to live in it but not enough to sleep alone in my own bed, even with another person present. Years passed and I grew older. When I became a teenager, my parents decided to expand and renovate the house. It was like a second stage of its life, and again it seemed to match mine. A lot of structural changes were made. The layout that I had known as a child shifted and rearranged itself. My parents' old room became my new room, the room I would use as my own as I stepped into that teenage phase when you want your own space and your own privacy. My old room, the one I had shared with my nanny, was turned into the maid's quarters. The garage, which used to hold the car, was remade and turned into my parents' new bedroom. On the right side of the house, where there had only been empty space before, they added a new garage that now led to the backyard. Because of these changes, there ended up being only 2 ways to get to the backyard. One way was from the front porch, passing through the new garage, and then going straight to the backyard from there. The other way was from inside the house, through the dining room next to my parents' new room. These 2 routes were on completely opposite sides of the house and did not connect indoors. If you took one path, you did not pass through the other. One time, after the renovations were done, I came out of my room and felt like going to the backyard. Maybe I just wanted to get some air, maybe I was bored and wanted to look outside. I do not really remember the exact reason, but I remember the scene clearly. I walked through the small hallway that led from the bedrooms toward the dining room. While I was walking, I passed my nanny who was coming from the opposite direction. We were walking past each other in that narrow space, and as we passed, I told her that I was going outside to the backyard. She acknowledged me as we crossed paths, and I kept going forward. I reached the door from the dining room that opened out toward the back of the house and stepped through it into the backyard area. There, standing and talking with the maids, was my nanny. She was already outside, busy in a conversation with them as if she had been there for a while. For a second, my mind could not process what I was seeing. Just moments before, I had passed her inside the house, walking toward the front side, and now here she was in the backyard before me, in a place she should not have been able to reach that quickly if she had gone the normal way. The only routes to the backyard were through the dining room door, which I had just used, and through the garage on the other side of the house. There were no secret hallways or hidden stairs that she could have used. I felt a strange, nervous energy rise inside me. Instead of walking calmly toward her, I turned around and hurried back into the house, my heart beating faster. My sudden, heavy footsteps and the expression on my face must have startled them, because my running inside scared my nanny and the other maids, and they rushed after me into the house, thinking that something terrible had happened to me outside. I began to look around as if I were searching for something, my hands moving over the walls and corners, and they kept asking what was wrong. In the confusion, I started looking for a trapdoor, some hidden passageway, anything that could explain how my nanny had managed to be in two places in such a short span of time. When they kept pressing me for an answer, I ended up laughing it off and told them that I only wanted to scare them. At that age, it felt easier to pretend I was joking rather than try to explain what I had just experienced. Only years later, when I heard and understood the word doppelganger, did I think back to that moment and feel a chill, because what I had seen that day matched that idea, a double, another version of a person, appearing where they should not be. As I grew older, I began to feel that the house was not just a silent background to our lives but something active, something that reacted to us. I came to believe that the overall mood inside the house, its atmosphere, somehow depended on my own mood or my state of health. It sounds strange and maybe a little self-centered, but whenever something was wrong with me, it felt like the whole house was affected. There was a stretch of time when everyone in the house became hostile with each other. My parents, who usually tried to keep peace, were arguing more often. My sister started arguing with the maids, getting into small fights that quickly grew into loud disagreements. My nanny argued with my sister, and also with the other maids. The tension did not just last for a day or two, it went on for several days, with voices raised and doors slammed, the air inside the house feeling heavy and unhappy. During that same time, I had a fever that lasted almost a week. My body was weak, my head hurt, and I felt emotionally low. I could barely move around the house, and when I lay in my room, I could hear the angry tones from other parts of the house. My nanny later told me that when I was sad like that, she would sometimes hear angry voices inside the house that did not seem to belong to any of us, as if something was echoing or copying the hostility and feeding it back. She also said that during those days she often saw someone lying in the bed in the maids' quarters even when everyone, including the maids, were outside doing their chores or talking. She would glance inside and see the shape of a body on the bed, only to find the room empty when she looked again. It was as if the house itself was reflecting my sickness and sadness back in strange, dark ways. Eventually, things changed. My parents decided to move to another house, the one we are living in now. When that happened, the master bedroom in our old house, which had once been full of their presents and things, became unoccupied for a very long time. My parents would still come back to that house, but only for weekends or, at most, stay for one night a week. It was like the house itself became a kind of halfway place, not fully abandoned but not fully lived in either. The master bedroom, in particular, started to feel like a room in pause, waiting. I often went inside that room when my parents were not using it, usually to take and use perfumes or other small things they left behind. I knew which bottles they were no longer using and which ones had been forgotten on the dresser, and I would quietly help myself to a spray or a small item now and then. One day, everyone else was seated at the dining table, talking and eating. I slipped away from them and went into my parents' room. I took what I wanted and then, as I was stepping out, I pulled the door closed behind me. As I did so, I felt a strong tug on the door from the inside. It was not the usual friction of wood against the floor or the frame. I know how that feels, a slow drag, a little resistance. This was different. It felt like an actual force pulling back against the pressure I was using to close it, as if someone on the other side had grabbed the handle and was pulling it open while I was trying to shut it. The sudden resistance surprised me so much that I allowed the door to move a few inches back, giving in for a moment. From the dining room, everyone had a clear view of me and the half-closed door behind me. When the door jerked back unexpectedly, all their faces turned toward me with wide eyes and open mouths, their expressions almost comical in how shocked they looked. They had seen the door move in a way that did not match my hand's motion. I just laughed nervously and tried to lighten the mood by saying, Somebody in there didn't want me to close the door just yet. I could feel the hairs on my arms stand up, but I did not want to scare myself further, so I made a joke instead. Another memorable time was when both my sister and I fell ill. We both came down with a fever that lasted for more than a week. It was not like a simple cold that passes in a couple of days. It was long and exhausting, and it wore all of us down. The one who suffered the most emotionally during that period was my mother. She is a doctor, a really good one who has cured so many people and helped so many patients get better, and yet when it came to her own children, she felt strangely powerless. She could monitor our temperature, give us medicine, and tell us to rest, but the fever did not break right away. She later told us how tortured she felt during that time, walking from room to room, feeling like she should be able to do more. She would frequently check on us, going into my room first, taking my temperature, feeling my forehead, making sure I was hydrated, and then crossing the house to my sister's room to do the same. On the last day of the fever, when we were both still weak and lying in our beds, she came into my room as usual. I told her that my grandfather had visited me in my dream and that he was smiling at me. I described it simply, like it was something normal. In the dream, he did not speak. He just stood there and smiled in that kind way he used to when he was alive. My mother checked my temperature and saw that I was still feverish, so she shrugged it off and told herself that it must have been a hallucination caused by my sick body. She did not take it as a sign, at least not at that moment. Then she went to my sister's room. When she stepped inside, something unexpected happened. Both she and my sister smelled the perfume that my grandfather used to wear when he was alive. It was a distinct scent, old-fashioned and familiar, and it filled the room as if someone had just walked through and left that trail behind. There was no bottle of that perfume lying around, no one else in the house who used it, and yet the smell was strong and unmistakable. My mother started to cry, overwhelmed by the connection between what I had told her and what she was now experiencing with my sister. Right after that, my body finally responded. I was suddenly able to get out of bed, and the fever that had weighed me down for days was gone. The same thing happened to my sister later that day. Her fever broke, and she could stand and move around again. It was as if my grandfather, wherever he was, had come to watch over us one last time and help us get better, making his presence known through dreams and the faint, lingering scent of his perfume. On top of all of these things, there was another kind of experience that I had over and over again in that house, something many people call sleep paralysis. There were many nights when I would be half asleep, stuck between wakefulness and dreams, and suddenly realize that I could not move. My mind would be awake enough to understand that I was in my bed, in my room, but my body felt completely frozen. No matter how much I tried to lift my arms or legs, nothing responded. At the same time, I would try to scream, either out of fear or to call someone to help me, but no sound would come out of my mouth. It felt like shouting into a void, my throat tight and useless. For some people, sleep paralysis happens once in a while, but for me, it happened almost every night, or at least it felt that frequent. It became so familiar that I stopped counting how many times I had gone through it while we lived in that house. The strange part is that even though I thought I was only silently screaming inside my head, my nanny, who stayed in the other room, always seemed to hear me. Remember the divider between my old room and my parents' room? That same thin separation also connected us to the next room. My nanny later told me that during those nights, she would hear me shouting her name clearly, calling out for her, as if my voice was cutting through the divider. She said that whenever she heard me calling, she would get up, open my door, and wake me. I would then snap out of the paralysis, able to move again and fully awake, my heart pounding and my body sweaty. The thing is, from my side, I never once tried to call her name. In my memory, I was always just trying to scream out of fear, not forming any words at all. I never had the presence of mind to think, I should call my nanny for help. I was just trapped, pushing against an invisible wall inside my own body. So if I was not really calling her name in those moments, if my mouth was not making those sounds, then who or what was calling her through the divider, using her name to pull her toward me and wake me up each time? That question still sits in the back of my mind whenever I think about that house and all the strange ways it seemed to respond to us. The house where these things happened was a huge place owned by my grandmother, who passed away in November 2012, and every time I think of it, I can still see its wide walls, its long hallways, and the way it always seemed full of life, noise, and footsteps because of us, her grandchildren, who loved to stay there more than in our own parents' houses. She often told us that the reason she made it that big was because of us, because she knew we liked to hang out there, sleep over, and treat her home like it was our own playground, and the way she said it always made us feel special and loved. It really was our second home, and sometimes it even felt more like our first. There were always cousins there, aunts and uncles dropping by, food cooking in the kitchen, voices mixing together from different parts of the house. The rooms seemed endless, and there were so many places to sit, talk, or sneak away for a bit of quiet. But over time we realized that aside from the regular people who came and went, there were other things in that house too, things we could not see clearly, things we sometimes bumped into, heard, or felt even when no one else was supposed to be there. My first encounter with something unseen in that house happened when I was in college. It was one of those ordinary evenings that started off as nothing special. I came home around 6:30 in the evening, the sky already dim, but not completely dark yet, and as always when I opened the gate and stepped inside, the house felt familiar and welcoming. When I entered, I saw my cousins downstairs in the dining and living area, already gathered and waiting for dinner to be served. They were chatting, laughing, and teasing each other the way we always did. My grandmother and grandfather were both in the living room, busy watching the news on television, focused on the screen, barely noticing me because they were so interested in what the news anchor was saying. I greeted them casually and continued to walk upstairs because I wanted to change my clothes and leave my things in the room where we, the girls, usually stayed. The house had its own rules about electricity, and one of those rules was that the lights on the second floor were kept turned off if no one was using the area. So when I reached the staircase and started to go up, the upper floor was dark except for the little bit of light coming from downstairs. I walked along the hallway on the second floor, my eyes adjusting to the dimness, following the familiar path I had walked so many times before, and as I moved forward, I suddenly had the clear feeling that I was about to bump into someone. There was a presence right in front of me, a shape in the darkness, so close that I instinctively shifted my body to one side, turning and walking sideways to avoid colliding with whoever it was. The reaction was so automatic that I even muttered, "Oops, sorry," as I walked past, the way you would when you accidentally get too close to someone in a narrow space. I did not stop to check who it was because I assumed it was just one of my cousins or another relative who had gone upstairs for something and was on their way back down. I continued to the girls' room, reached for the light switch, and turned it on. The room lit up, and I stepped inside, dropping my things on the bed. For a moment I turned around, expecting whoever I passed in the hallway to follow me in or to hear their footsteps going down the stairs. But the hallway behind me was completely empty. There was no one there. The silence of the second floor suddenly felt too thick. I frowned and tried to think logically. Maybe whoever it was had moved quickly, gone into another room, or turned down the corridor toward my grandmother's room. But when I listened more closely, I heard nothing at all, no doors opening or closing, no footsteps, nothing. The memory of feeling that solid presence in front of me, the way I had to shift my body to avoid hitting it, replayed in my mind, but I did not want to scare myself, so I pushed the uneasiness away, told myself I was just tired from school, changed my clothes, and went back downstairs. When I reached the dining area, my cousins were still there, sitting and waiting for the food to be served, still chatting and joking. Trying to keep my voice normal, I asked them, "Who among you just came downstairs before me?" All of them stared at me, confused. One of them answered in a straightforward tone, "No one went upstairs. We've been here the whole time." Their faces were blank, not teasing, not lying, just honestly wondering why I was asking. A little knot of fear tightened in my chest, but I quickly forced a smile and shrugged it off, pretending that it was nothing and that I had probably imagined someone in the dark hallway. I did not want to think too much about it because the more I thought, the more it made my skin crawl. The days passed, and I tried to forget that moment, but the house has a way of reminding you that you are not the only one walking its halls. It was a Saturday evening when another incident tied into that first experience, and made it much harder to ignore. That night, some of my cousins and I were upstairs in the second-floor living room. It was one of our usual weekends together, the kind where we all decided to sleep over at our grandmother's house because it was more fun than going home early. We were watching television shows, laughing at scenes, making comments, and enjoying the comfortable closeness of family. My brother was with us too. At some point, he stood up and went to the girls' room to grab a cigarette from my bag. It was normal for him to borrow one if he ran out, and the room was just a short walk down the hallway. After a while, he came back, cigarette already in hand, but his expression was different. He looked at us with a puzzled, almost disturbed look on his face. Then he said, "I felt like I was going to bump into someone on my way to your room." The exact same feeling I had before, the sensation of almost colliding with an invisible person in the hallway, was now happening to him too. The moment he said that, all of us cousins went quiet for a second, each of us looking around at each other. Then one by one, people started sharing their own similar experiences. One cousin said that he had felt it too, another admitted that she once moved sideways in that same hallway thinking she was about to hit someone only to find nobody there, and another added that sometimes in the dark, especially coming from or going toward our grandmother's room, it felt like something was standing there watching or waiting. It was only when we started comparing details that we noticed the pattern. All of them, almost every single story, seemed to trace back to the area near our grandmother's room. It was as if that part of the hallway held some kind of unseen traffic that we kept bumping into without ever seeing clearly. The second strange experience that stands out in my memory happened during another ordinary day when a simple household routine became something eerie. That time, I was again on the second floor, sitting with two of my male cousins, watching television. We were comfortable, casually sprawled out, half watching the screen and half scrolling through our phones, just like any normal late afternoon. Nearby, my aunt was in the bathroom taking a bath with her 4-year-old daughter. The bathroom was on the same floor, and we were used to hearing the faint sound of running water or her voice talking gently to her child while helping her wash. At some point, I saw my aunt come out of the bathroom and walk back into her room with her daughter. It was a quick glance, nothing strange, just a normal movement. She passed by, towel around her, child with her, and went into the bedroom they used. I saw it clearly enough to register it in my mind, and I went back to watching the television, not thinking about it any further. A few minutes later, something startled me deeply. I heard my aunt's voice again, talking to her daughter inside the bathroom, as clearly as if she were standing right there behind the door. I stopped paying attention to the TV and turned my head toward the bathroom, feeling confused. I knew I had seen her come out already and go into the room, so why was she still or again inside the bathroom? I glanced over at my cousins sitting beside me, and both of them were staring back at me with the same unsettled look, which told me that they had heard it too and that this was not something only in my head. It was that strange, slightly delayed realization that something was wrong, the kind that makes your spine tingle. One of my cousins, trying to be brave, stood up and walked toward the bathroom. He opened the door to check, and what he saw made the situation even more chilling. My aunt and her daughter were still inside, busy with their bath, as if they had never left. That meant that the aunt we thought we had seen coming out earlier, walking past us into the bedroom, was not actually her. It was something else that had taken on her shape, a copy, a reflection, something that tricked our eyes into believing she was there when in fact she was still in the bathroom. That realization sank into all of us slowly, and we did not know what to say. We did not want to scare my aunt by telling her while she was still in the bath, so we kept it to ourselves for the time being, but inside, it made us even more aware that the house was full of more than just the people we knew. The third story is from one of my girl cousins, and even though it did not happen directly to me, I was there during parts of it, and the way she told it, with her voice shaking and her eyes serious, made it impossible to dismiss. Let us call her Sheila, which is not her real name, but I want to protect her identity a bit. She shared her experiences with us and swore many times that she was telling the truth, that she had no reason to make anything like that up. It began on a Friday night when we had all decided to sleep on the first floor living room for no particular reason, just because it seemed like a fun change. We moved pillows and blankets, set them up on the floor like a big indoor camp, and joked as we tried to pick the best spots near the TV or near the fan. We all slept on the floor that night, except for Sheila. Because she had asthma and needed a more elevated spot where the dust on the floor would not bother her so much, we agreed that she would sleep on the couch. Everyone understood that and didn't question it. Eventually the noise died down, the TV was turned off, and one by one we all fell asleep. I was deep into my own sleep when I heard Sheila's voice beside me, asking me to move so she could sleep beside me. Her tone was soft and a bit tired, nothing unusual, like a simple request from someone who wanted to change position. Still half asleep and not wanting to wake up fully, I just shifted my body a little to make room. I did not open my eyes much and did not really think about why she was leaving the couch to come down to the floor. I just moved and went right back to my own dream world, letting sleep pull me under completely again. The next morning, when I woke up, Sheila was still sleeping on the floor near us, not on the couch where she had started the night. The scene did not look strange at first glance. We were all scattered around the living room, still a bit tangled in blankets, hair messy from sleep. I sat up and noticed that our maid was in another part of the house, busy cleaning something off the floor. She looked annoyed, and when she caught sight of me standing there, she shouted, "Don't play if you don't know how to fix your mess!" Her voice carried a tone of irritation, and she clearly believed that I had done something that made extra work for her. I was too sleepy and confused to pick a fight or even ask what she meant, so I just ignored it, went back into the living room, and turned on the television instead, letting the sound of the morning shows distract me. Later, when more of us were awake and gathered for breakfast, one of my cousins suddenly turned to Sheila and asked, "Why did you sleep on the floor? You know you have asthma." The question hung in the air. Sheila, who had been quiet and still a bit drowsy, looked pale when she heard this. She took a breath and then started to explain what had happened to her after we had all fallen asleep the night before. She told us that while everyone was already sleeping and the living room was dark and quiet, she remained awake on the couch. At some point, she started to hear the sound of a baby crying. The crying was not loud enough to shake the whole house, but it was clear, distinct, and it went on steadily for about 2 to 3 minutes. It was not the muffled crying from a TV or a radio. It sounded real, like there was an actual baby somewhere in the house, whining and sobbing. We did not have a baby in the house at that time, so she knew something was wrong, and the sound made her feel anxious and cold. To try and drown out the crying and calm herself down, she decided to play some music on her phone. She put on a song, let it play, and after a while, the sound of the baby crying stopped. She felt a little relieved but still nervous. Then, after a few more minutes, something else happened. A basket that was placed on top of the refrigerator suddenly fell. This basket was normally stable, not at the edge, not hanging at an angle where it easily could slip off on its own. Sheila said that what really frightened her was not the fact that it fell, but the way it fell. She said it did not slide or roll. Instead, it looked like someone had held it, and then dropped it straight down. The movement was too controlled, too deliberate, like an invisible hand had grabbed it and let it go. That was the moment when fear fully settled into her, and she decided she no longer felt safe up on the couch. She moved down to the floor to be closer to the rest of us, hoping that being near others would make her feel better. That was when she woke me and asked me to move so she could sleep beside me. When she finished telling this story, we all looked at the basket she had pointed out, still sitting back in its usual place. Then the memory of our maid cleaning something earlier and scolding us for playing and making a mess suddenly made a lot more sense. Sheila's experience did not end there. On another day, she was again in the living room on the first floor, sitting on the same couch and watching television, while the rest of us were outside the house, hanging out or doing other things. Inside, it was only her and our maid. Everything seemed normal at first. Then, from the other part of the house, our maid started shouting again, her voice full of frustration. "Didn't I tell you not to play if you don't know how to clean your mess? I just finished cleaning the house," she yelled, clearly directing her anger toward Sheila. Still confused and not knowing what the maid was talking about, Sheila stood up to see what the problem was. That was when she noticed that the vase that was usually placed beside the couch, right where she had been sitting, was no longer there. Instead, it was now standing in the middle of the stairs, positioned on a step as if someone had carefully put it there. It had not fallen or broken, it had been moved and placed. Shocked and confused, she turned to the maid and tried to explain herself, saying, "I didn't play. And there is no way I am going to play with that vase. I know how Grandma hates it when we touch her precious vase." We all knew that vase was one of our grandmother's favorite decorations, something we were always warned not to touch, move, or bump into when we were younger. None of us dared to play with it or use it in any kind of game. After this strange incident, Sheila stepped outside the house to join us, still shaken. When she told us the story, it became clear that whatever was playing with things in that house was not any of us. It was something else. On that particular day, all of us grandchildren had been outside, leaving just Sheila and the maid inside. And yet, the vase had somehow moved from its safe spot next to the couch all the way to the middle of the stairs, as if someone had wanted to show that they were there, able to touch and rearrange things in ways that could not be ignored. It was as if the house, or something in it, wanted to make sure we knew we were sharing that space with more than just our large, noisy, living family. It happened on a Sunday night, the kind of night that would have felt completely ordinary if not for everything that had been happening in our neighborhood lately. And I remember clearly how my mind was already on alert before anything strange even started. For the past few weeks there had been reports of break-ins in the area, stories from neighbors about doors found half open in the morning, padlocks cut cleanly through, windows tampered with, and small but important things stolen from inside people's homes. We would hear about it during the day, from people dropping by, from quick conversations at the gate, from worried voices on the phone telling us to be careful because someone's house down the street had been broken into again. Those stories slowly got under my skin, especially because my dad's room is downstairs and he is not as young or as strong as he used to be. The more I thought about the break-ins, the more I realized how vulnerable he would be if something happened at night, while everyone was asleep. So I decided to change my own usual routine for a while. Instead of sleeping in my room upstairs where I normally felt most comfortable, I moved down and started sleeping in the living room on the couch so I could keep an ear out for any unusual noises and make sure Dad was safe. I told myself that if someone ever tried to break in, I wanted to be close enough to hear them, close enough to see something, close enough to react. For extra protection I kept my 1911 within easy reach, not in some locked drawer or hidden bag, but somewhere I could grab it in a second if I needed to. I knew how to handle it. I had combat experience from before, and I trusted myself enough to know that as long as I stayed calm and careful, I would not panic or do something reckless. The gun was not there to make me feel powerful. It was there because I loved my father, and I wanted to be prepared in case those break-ins came our way. Several nights passed like that. I got used to the stiffness of the couch, the way the cushions never quite hugged my back the way my own bed did. I would lie there in the darkness, listening to every sound, trying to separate the normal noises of an old house from anything that might be a threat. Every creak of the wood, every hum of the refrigerator, every distant bark of a dog made me pay attention. I kept telling myself I would go back to my own room once things in the neighborhood calmed down, but for a while it did not feel like that would happen anytime soon. Then that Sunday afternoon, my brother dropped by unexpectedly. He stayed for a while, and we caught up about ordinary things, nothing too serious, just the usual talk between siblings. As the day grew later and the sky began to shift to evening colors, he decided he would spend the night instead of heading back out. He knew about the break-ins, of course, and when he saw I had been sleeping in the living room for several nights, he volunteered to sleep there that night in my place. He said it casually, but there was care behind it. He wanted to help, to share the responsibility, to be the one nearer to Dad's room for a change. The moment he said it, I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I will not lie, as much as I wanted to protect Dad, I missed my own bed badly. The idea of going back to my own room, of stretching out on my mattress, of feeling familiar sheets and pillows around me, made me almost giddy. I agreed right away and handed the role of downstairs guard over to him. I could not have been any happier. That night, after dinner, the house settled into its usual quiet. Dad went to his room, my brother took the spot on the couch in the living room, and I went upstairs for the first time in a while to sleep in my bedroom again. As I lay down and stretched my body across the bed, I felt all the tiredness of the previous nights hit me at once. The comfort of my own room, my own pillow, the familiar smell of my blanket, and the softness of the mattress felt like a luxury. It did not take long for me to drift off. Being a light sleeper, I normally take some time before fully sinking into deep sleep, but that night, comfort and exhaustion worked together, and I dozed off much faster than usual. I do not know how long I slept before things changed. All I remember is that at some point in the night, in that strange space between dreaming and waking, I began to hear something at the foot of my bed. It was not a loud noise at first, not a bang or a crash that would make you jump out of fear, but a low, steady sound. Whispering. At first I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was part of a dream, voices from some half-formed scene leaking into my ears. But the more I listened, the more I realized that the whispering was not fading like a dream usually does. It was staying, and not only staying, but becoming clearer and more distinct. It was right there at the foot of my bed, as if the source of the sound was not far away in another room or outside the house, but in the same space, near my feet, near the edge of the mattress. I could tell very quickly that there was more than one person there. It was not just one voice talking to itself. There were at least two, maybe more. The whispers overlapped each other, cutting in and out, rising and falling in tone like people arguing quietly but intensely, trying to keep their voices low so no one would hear them, but too caught up in their disagreement to remain truly silent. They seemed to be arguing, though I could not catch any proper word yet. My heart began to beat faster. Because of everything that had been happening around us lately, my first thought was not ghosts or anything paranormal. My first thought was burglars. In that instant, all my senses sharpened. The easy sleepiness vanished, replaced by a tight focus. My combat experience, my training, all the instincts I had built over time kicked in without me even having to think about it. I did not freeze, I did not stay lying down. Instead, I moved. I jumped out of bed quickly but carefully, my body reacting in one fluid motion. My hand went straight to where I had placed my pistol, and in a second it was in my grip, the familiar weight steadying my mind. I cocked it, pointed it toward the foot of the bed, aiming at the place where the whispering was coming from, ready for the sight of one or more intruders standing there in the dark. But as my eyes adjusted and I looked hard at the space in front of me, I saw nothing. The floor was empty. There were no silhouettes, no shadows shaped like people, no strangers crouching or standing there. Yet in those first few seconds after I got up, the whispering continued on as if completely unaffected by my movement. It did not stop, did not stutter, did not change tone because I was now awake and standing. It was still there, in the same spot, as if invisible mouths were speaking and arguing with each other at the foot of my bed. The fact that I could hear them so clearly and yet see nothing at all was more frightening than the idea of real burglars. For a moment I just stood there, gun pointing at empty air, my mind trying to make sense of something that did not make sense. Finally, I decided to do the most natural thing I could think of in that situation. I moved toward the light switch. As soon as I switched all the lights on, flooding the room with bright, artificial light, the whispering stopped. It was not a gradual fading. It cut off suddenly, like someone pressed a mute button. I stood there listening, but the only sound I could hear was my own breathing and the faint noise from outside the house, maybe a distant car or the night wind moving through something. I began to search the entire room, not just with my eyes but with my body. I looked under the bed, checked behind furniture, opened the closet, stepped into the corners where the shadows had lingered when the lights were off. There was no one. No sign of forced entry, no open window, nothing moved or disturbed in a way that suggested someone had been there physically. My room looked exactly the same as it always did, and yet I knew I had not imagined those voices. Still, I needed to be absolutely sure that the rest of the house was safe, especially Dad downstairs. So I went out into the hallway and made my way down the stairs, my pistol still in my hand, though I kept my finger away from the trigger, as I have always been trained to do when not actively engaging anything. I checked the hallway, the bathroom, and any room upstairs that needed checking. Then I went downstairs, moving slowly but steadily, feeling the familiar give of the steps beneath my feet. When I reached the living room, I saw my brother lying there on the couch, just as we had agreed, fast asleep. He was snoring softly, completely unaware of anything out of the ordinary. There was no broken lock, no open door, no shattered glass, no signs that someone had tried to get in. Everything looked peaceful and normal, except for the pounding in my chest and the echoes of the whispering still trapped in my memory. I stood there for a few moments longer, scanning the area, listening for any sound that did not belong. There was nothing. Just the usual quiet of our home at that hour. Satisfied, at least in a physical sense, that we had not been invaded by real human intruders, I went back upstairs to my room. Even though the logical part of my brain had calmed down a bit, another part of me was still on edge. I turned off the light again, telling myself that if I kept everything bright all night, I would never get back to sleep. I lay down on my bed once more, trying to convince myself that it had all been a trick of my half-awake mind, some strange overlap between dream and reality. I closed my eyes. Not long after that, just as I was starting to drift off again, the whispering resumed. There was no build-up, no distant noise approaching. It simply started again, as if someone had pressed play on a paused recording. The voices were right there at the foot of my bed, still in the same place, and they sounded exactly as they had before. They did not seem to miss a beat. It was as if everything that had happened, my jumping out of bed, my pointing the pistol, my turning on the lights, my search of the room, my trip downstairs and back, had not mattered at all to them. They had just paused and then picked up their conversation where they left off the moment the darkness returned. This time, instead of reacting instantly with my body, I forced myself to stay still for a while and listen. I wanted to understand what they were saying, or at least recognize some word, some phrase, something that would tell me what kind of voices these were. I focused hard, blocking out my fear as best as I could. I listened for tone, for rhythm, for any kind of pattern. The voices continued their low, urgent exchange, but the more I concentrated, the more I realized I could not make sense of the language they were using. It was totally foreign to me, nothing like the languages I knew or had heard around me growing up. I could tell it had its own structure, its own sound, but it did not match anything familiar. There was a lot of K and Z sounds in what they were saying, consonants clicking and buzzing softly in their whispered speech, like their words were shaped from sharp edges and soft hisses. It felt ancient and strange, something from somewhere I had never been and could never visit. The fact that I could not understand them at all made me feel even more helpless. I had no idea what the conversation was about. I did not know if they were talking about me, or about the house, or about something entirely unrelated. They might have been arguing over something, or planning something, or recalling something old. All I knew for sure was that they were there, and that they were real enough to be heard, even if they were not real enough to be seen. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the whispering stopped again. The silence that followed felt different from normal silence. It was heavier, almost thick, as if the air itself was waiting for the next thing to happen. For a moment I lay there, staring at the darkness in front of me, my ears straining to hear anything. That was when I heard footfalls in the hallway. They were clear, distinct steps, moving along the floor just outside my room, heading down the hallway the way a person would when walking from one end of the house to the other. The odd thing was that our house is old, at least by our standards, and one of its most familiar traits is the way the floorboards complain whenever someone walks on them. Even the slightest movement along the hallway, a light step from a child or a heavy footfall from an adult, usually causes the boards to creak, to groan softly, to speak in that old wooden voice that tells you someone is moving about. It is a sound I grew up with and learned to recognize long ago, a sound that normally comforts me because it means the house is alive with people. But what I heard that night was different. I could hear the footsteps clearly, the weight of each step, the rhythm of someone walking, but there was no creaking from the floorboards at all. The wood did not respond. The hallway, which should have complained loudly at that hour, stayed unnaturally quiet. It was like something was walking without really touching the house, without really pressing into the floor in the way a real person would. The mismatch between the sound of walking and the silence of the floor made my skin crawl. I knew then, with a certainty that did not come from logic but from instinct, that whatever was out there was not something I could confront with a weapon. I did not bother to get up and check what was outside my door. I already knew exactly what I would see if I did. Nothing. An empty hallway, shadows, the same familiar walls and doors, and absolutely no visible source for the sounds I had just heard. So I stayed where I was, in my bed, clutching my own calm like it was something I had to hold together with both hands. I waited for the footfalls to fade, and eventually they did. The night slowly settled again into its thick quiet, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. Somehow, despite everything, exhaustion finally dragged me down again, and I slept. The next morning, over breakfast, as the sunlight came through the windows and the house looked normal and harmless as it always did during the day, I decided to tell the others what had happened. It felt important not to keep it just inside my head. I told Dad, my brother, and Tess, our house help, about the whispering at the foot of my bed, about how I had jumped up with my pistol thinking they were burglars, about how the whispers continued even when no one was there, about the strange language full of K and Z sounds, and about the silent footfalls in the hallway. I laid it all out while they sat there eating and drinking their morning coffee. My brother listened with a serious expression, probably replaying his own quiet night on the couch and realizing that while he had slept soundly, something else had been moving upstairs. Dad took it in too, and although he did not react in an exaggerated way, I could see in his eyes that he believed I had heard something real, because he knows I am not the type to make up stories for attention. Tess, on the other hand, was visibly spooked. Her eyes grew wide, and she put down whatever she was holding. She kept glancing at the stairs as if something might suddenly appear there while we were talking. The idea that there had been unseen people upstairs in the night, whispering in a strange language and walking along the hallway without making the usual floorboard sounds, unsettled her so much that she did not dare go upstairs at all that day. Every time someone needed something from the upper floor, she would find a reason to stay downstairs, pretending to be busy with other tasks, and I did not blame her. After hearing what I had heard and knowing that sometimes the things you cannot see can be more frightening than any visible threat, I understood completely why the stairs, the hallway, and the second floor suddenly felt different to her under the bright light of day. I was really shocked the first time my classmates told me about what they had seen, because the moment they said they saw me was the exact time I remember sitting inside a jeepney with some of our other classmates, heading home like we always did after school, tired but relaxed, just thinking about getting back to the house, resting, maybe eating something, and then dealing with homework or projects. That day felt totally normal to me. Classes had finished, we walked out of the school gate together in small groups. The sun was still out but slowly going down, and the air had that usual mix of heat, dust, and noise from the street. I remember clearly how we waved at some friends, lined up for a jeepney, climbed in, squeezed ourselves on the long wooden seats, and laughed about something one of our teachers had said. Inside the jeepney, I was sitting between two classmates, my bag on my lap like I always carried it, my uniform a little wrinkled from the long day. I can still feel the way the jeepney shook when it moved over broken parts of the road, and how the wind blew in through the open side, carrying the smell of exhaust, food from sidewalk vendors, and that familiar city smell you never really notice until you stop and think about it. We paid our fares, passed the coins toward the driver, and joked along the way, talking about homework, crushes, teachers, and weekend plans. There was nothing strange about that ride at all. Nothing out of place or unusual, So when later some classmates told me, very seriously, that they had seen me walking near the school at the same time I knew I had been inside the jeepney with a whole group of friends, it felt like the floor inside my mind shifted a little. They told me that they had been walking along the road and had seen me not far from them. They said I was walking alone, carrying my bag, moving in the same way I always did, and they were sure it was me. They tried to catch my attention, they said. They waved and even called out, but according to them, I just walked past them without even looking their way, as if I had seen them and decided to ignore them, or as if I was lost in my own thoughts. They were confused in that moment, but they just let it go, thinking maybe I was distracted. Only later, when we were all together and I told them I had been riding the jeepney at that time, did everything clash. When I explained that I was not walking outside near the school because I had gotten on the jeepney with other classmates, they looked at me and almost laughed from how sure they were. They did not back down. They insisted that they really saw me, and I could see from their faces that they were not joking. They talked over each other, confirming details, nodding, agreeing that it was me, 100%, no doubt. They said that from the way I walked, the way I moved my shoulders and arms, the way my head was slightly tilted when I looked around, up to the bag I was carrying and even how I held the strap, everything matched me perfectly. It was not just a similar uniform or similar hairstyle. They were sure it was me. I remember replying in a nervous voice, asking them in our own language, "Sigurado kayo?" Which means, "Are you sure?" I was hoping someone would laugh and admit it was a mistake, or that they were teasing me, but instead they all answered quickly and firmly, "Una," meaning, "Yes, we are." They even looked at each other like they were checking that everyone remembered the same thing, and they did. At that moment, all of us silently understood something. It was not me who had passed them. It was something that looked exactly like me, down to the small details, appearing in a place I knew I had not been at that time. That alone was enough to bother me, but as the years went by, I realized that my classmates were not the only ones who had stories like that about me. They were actually part of a pattern that started when I was much younger. The first one who had a story like that was my cousin. I was still a little kid back then, maybe around 5 or 6 years old, when I first heard my parents talking about something strange involving me. I was not even part of the conversation at first. I only heard their voices from another part of the house. My mom was telling my father about something her niece had experienced. This cousin lived in Aklan, a province far from Manila where we were staying. During that time, we did not travel much, and as a child I was always at home or somewhere nearby with my family. According to my mom, her niece, my cousin, had told her that she saw me once in a marketplace in their town. She said she was in a busy market area, with all the stalls and vendors and people walking around, when she suddenly spotted what she thought was me, walking alone through the crowd. She was so surprised because, logically, it made no sense. How could I possibly be there, in that marketplace so far away from Manila, and even more shocking, walking by myself with no adult family member anywhere near me? My cousin knew that our family lived in Manila and that I was just a small child, so there was no way I could have traveled all the way to Aklan alone. But the more she replayed the image in her mind, the more she insisted that it really was me that she had seen. She described my face, my hair, the way I walked, and the clothes I was wearing, and everything matched how I looked during that time. The way my cousin described me to my mom sounded exactly like me. It was not just a random kid who looked a little similar. It was me, in her eyes, completely and clearly. My parents were both really surprised when they heard this story. They did not know what to say about it at first. They knew exactly where I had been at that time, and it definitely was not in a marketplace in Aklan. They knew I had been in Manila, probably playing somewhere at home, or maybe even sleeping. They were responsible parents. They never would have let a child my age go around alone, and they certainly did not have the money or reason to suddenly fly or sail to another province just for fun. So when my cousin told them her story, they just looked at each other and wondered how such a thing could even happen. They did not have any explanation, and back then I was too young to fully understand the meaning of what they were saying. I only remember hearing the story later and feeling a strange shiver inside my chest, because it was like a hint that something unusual had been shadowing me since I was a child, even before I was conscious of it. The next experience, another one that made this whole thing even stranger, came from my high school classmate and friend. After we graduated from high school, we did not get to see each other much anymore because we went to different colleges, had different schedules, and started living separate lives. Still, we tried to keep in touch from time to time by sending each other text messages. Nothing too serious, just checking in, saying hi, asking how life was going, updating each other about small things. One day, during one of our usual text conversations, she suddenly told me something that caught me off guard. She said that she had seen me at a place called Stop and Shop in Esta Mesa, Manila. This is a specific area, with stores, movement, people walking around, and if someone says they saw you there, you would normally either remember it or know that it did not happen. I immediately asked her when exactly she saw me, the exact day and time. I was already feeling that something was off, so I wanted to be sure there was no chance I had just forgotten or mixed up my own schedule. When she told me the exact time and day that she claimed she saw me, I was completely shocked. On that date and time, I knew for sure that I had not been anywhere near Stop and Shop. In fact, I had not been to that place for a long time before that. There was no good reason for me to go there at that period, and I was somewhere else entirely, living my normal life. I told her that it was impossible for her to have seen me there because I simply had not been there. She did not accept that easily. She insisted, once again very seriously, that it had really been me. She said she recognized my face and my body language immediately. She also described some of my physical features, like my height, the way I carried myself, and even some small details about my posture and how I turned my head when I looked around. All of that made it harder to just dismiss her words. But the detail that surprised me the most was when she mentioned that, at the time she saw me, I looked like I had just gotten a fresh haircut. She said my hair looked newly cut, the edges still neat, the shape obviously new. When I heard that, my mind froze for a second because she was right about one thing. I really had just gotten a haircut. It was around my third year in college, and I remembered clearly that around that date I had gone to the barber for a trim, and my hair was still at that stage where it feels lighter and cleaner than usual. That detail, something she could not easily guess, made her story a lot more disturbing. She described seeing me, newly haircut, in a place where I knew I had not set foot for months. I did not know what to say to her after that. There was nothing I could argue that would change what she believed she saw, and I could not change what I knew I had actually done that day. We were both holding on to our own truths, and both of them were complete and clear, and yet they did not match. The last one I will share is from my uncle, my father's brother, and this one hit me differently because it came from family and happened so close to home. One day, after I arrived home from school, tired and sweaty from the commute, my uncle came over to our house. Normally he would come by to visit, to talk to my dad, or just to have coffee and chat a bit. But this time, he came straight to me and told me, without any greeting or pause, that he had just seen me walking home earlier. He said, "Nikita kita kaina palwiya," which means, "I saw you earlier heading home." His voice had a slight edge to it, like he was offended or confused. He told me that he had been near our Barongi post, the small local office in the neighborhood, when he saw me walking past, supposedly on my way home. He said he called me, using my name in the familiar tone he always did, but that I did not turn around or react. According to him, I just kept walking straight ahead, completely ignoring him as if I had not heard anything at all or as if I did not respect him enough to respond. Because of that, he felt a little disrespected and upset. From his point of view, he thought I had seen him and chosen to pretend I had not, which is something I would never do intentionally. When he told me this, I immediately felt uneasy and told him that I had not passed by that way at all during that time. The route he said he had seen me on was not the route I had taken that day. I tried to explain in detail where I had really gone, which street I had used, and the time I had passed certain corners. It simply did not match his story. I insisted it was not me that he had seen, but some other person who might have looked like me from a distance. For a moment, he looked at my face, silent, then he seemed to soften his tone. He shrugged a little and said that maybe it had not been me after all, and then he let it go out loud. But even as he said that, I could see in his eyes that he still believed what he had seen. Deep down, he still stood by his memory that it had really been me he had passed near the Burundi post, that it was me who had ignored his call and kept walking. That incident happened at the start of my senior year in college, which meant that by then, I already had several stories involving people seeing me where I had not been. When I put all these stories together in my mind, the cousin in Ackland seeing me in the marketplace as a child, the classmates seeing me near the school while I was in a jeepney, the high school friends seeing me at Stop and Shop in Sta Mesa with a new haircut when I had not been there in a long time, and my uncle seeing me near our Burundi post walking home on a route I had not used. It started to feel like there was some unseen double of me moving around in the world, appearing here and there at odd times, crossing paths with people I knew and confusing them, leaving me with strange stories that I can neither prove nor fully deny. Some people who heard all of this told me that maybe I have a doppelganger, a sort of double or twin that looks exactly like me but is not me, a copy that sometimes appears in different locations for reasons no one understands. I do not know if that is really the case, and I am not sure what I truly believe, but I cannot ignore the pattern of these stories either. Maybe there is something out there that looks like me and walks streets I have not walked, standing in places I have not been, moving through the world with my face and my body but a different mind and purpose. The idea is creepy, but at the same time, there is a part of me that feels curious. If it is true that I have a doppelganger, if there really is another, me, out there, then a part of me wonders what he is like, what he thinks, where he goes, and why he appears in front of the people I know. And if ever there would be a chance, if life decided one day to put us in the same place at the same time, I think I would want to see him with my own eyes, to know if he really does look like me as closely as everyone says, and to finally understand what all these strange sightings over the years have really been about. In 1992, my father finally decided to leave the company where he had worked for 17 long years and start something of his own, something he could call his own name. So he opened an auto repair shop, putting all his skills, hopes, and savings into that dream. He leased a half-hectare piece of land right beside the highway somewhere in Negros Occidental. When we first saw it, the land looked like nothing more than an open field, a wide empty space covered with grass and low plants, with the highway on one side and sky stretching far in every direction. The only thing that really stood out on that land was a very big, very old camotsile tree standing alone near the far end of the lot, right at the center of the back side. Its branches spread wide, its trunk thick and dark with age, its roots like fingers pressing deep into the ground as if it had been watching that piece of land for generations before we ever came. Underneath that old tree, my father decided to build our small wooden house. The house was simple, made from wood and light materials, and it did not have much space, but to us it felt like the beginning of a new life. In front of the house, close to the highway, my father marked off an area as his workspace for the repair shop. There he set up his tools, a simple workbench, and enough room for a few vehicles to be parked and fixed. The smell of oil and metal soon mixed with the scent of fresh grass and the faint sweetness of the camotsile fruits when they were in season. On the right side of the lot stood our only nearby neighbor, a family who made concrete hollow blocks. Their area was always dusty and busy, and we often heard the steady sound of blocks being molded and stacked. Aside from them, the place felt a little isolated. Behind us and to the left, the land stretched open, green and quiet, with only the occasional passing truck or car breaking the stillness. Because the land was so wide and most of it was just grass and open space, my parents decided it would be useful to raise goats there. It seemed like a practical idea. Our neighbors already had their own herd of goats, and we would often see them grazing peacefully, walking slowly across the lot eating grass, their bells softly jingling. So my parents bought goats of our own. At first, it felt like a good decision. The goats ran and played under the sun, moved around freely over the land, and sometimes came close to our house, their calls mixing with the everyday sounds of the shop. We imagined that one day we would have many goats, enough to sell or use, and that they would be one more way to help our family survive and grow. For the first few months of our stay there, everything seemed to go well. The business was starting, my father had some customers, the goats were doing fine, and we were slowly adjusting to life beside the highway with the big kametsile tree watching over us like some ancient guardian. But slowly, almost without us noticing at first, things began to change, and then they began to go wrong in ways that were hard to explain. It started with the goats. One by one, they began to get sick. At first, we thought it was just a common problem, something that happens when animals eat something bad or get infected with something in the grass, so my parents tried to treat them. But the sickness did not pass easily. Some of the goats became weak and stopped eating properly. They would lie down more than usual, their eyes dull, their breaths shallow. Even the pregnant goats, which we had been so excited about because we were expecting new babies, started having problems. They would give birth to stillborn kids, tiny bodies that never took a first breath, and then the mother goats themselves would grow weaker after giving birth, as if something was draining them from the inside, and within a few days they too would die. We buried goat after goat in the soil around the property, until slowly, our small herd disappeared. Soon, all of our goats were gone. The strange thing was that our neighbors' goats, which grazed on the same land and walked under the same sky, seemed perfectly fine. They were strong, active, and kept producing healthy young. Their herd grew while ours faded away. Watching that difference made worry settle in our home like a heavy shadow. My parents did not know how to explain it. They tried to look for practical reasons, but in the end, all we really saw was that something was wrong, and that whatever it was, it seemed to be affecting only us. As time went on, it was not only the goats that began to suffer. My father's business, which had started with such hope, also began to fall apart. For an auto repair shop beside a highway, you would expect a steady stream of customers, people who needed help with their vehicles. At first, my father had some regulars and walk-in customers, and we believed that word of mouth would slowly build a strong base for his new business. But instead of growing, the number of customers started to shrink. Days would pass with only 1 or 2 vehicles to work on, and some days there were none at all. My father would sit outside in the work area, wiping tools that were already clean or staring at the road, waiting for someone to stop by and ask for help, but fewer and fewer people did. Bills began to pile up. He struggled to pay for the rent on the land, for the tools, for the parts he needed to keep in stock, and most painfully, he struggled to pay for our school tuition. There were days when my parents would whisper in the corner about what they could still afford and what they could no longer pay. There were evenings when we did not sit down to a decent meal. Sometimes there was only rice with a little salt, and maybe a tiny bit of something on the side. The joy and hope that had filled the air when we first moved there slowly turned into a feeling of heavy worry and quiet desperation. Around that time of hardship, my mother began to tell me some things that made everything feel even more unsettling, stories that were not about money or goats or broken cars, but about things that did not belong to the ordinary world. One of the stories she told me took place at dusk, that time of day when the sky is not fully dark yet but the light is fading, when shadows stretch long and everything feels a little softer and quieter. She had gone out to our makeshift bathroom, which was a simple structure made from light materials and set a few meters away from our house. She only meant to wash her face and freshen up after a tiring day. She bent forward over a basin, splashing water on her face, feeling the coolness against her skin. As she stayed bent like that, her eyes closed for a moment, she suddenly felt something strange, like a cold, light cloth brushing gently over the top of her head. It was not the feeling of a hand, but more like fabric touching her hair and scalp. Surprised, she quickly looked up and opened her eyes. In front of her, standing there, she saw a lady dressed in white. The woman's clothes were long and pale, and she was just there, silent, facing my mother. For a heartbeat, my mother froze, staring, trying to understand what she was seeing. The air around them felt still and cold. Then my mother blinked hard, as if trying to clear her vision, and when she opened her eyes again, the lady was gone. There was no sound of someone walking away, no movement of grass or rustle of cloth, nothing to show that anyone had been there at all. My mother was left standing alone in the small bathroom, water still dripping from her face, her heart pounding. She went back to the house shaken and confused, unsure if she had just imagined it, but deep inside she knew she had seen something real, something that did not come from her own mind. Another time, not long after that first encounter, my mother was inside our house late in the afternoon, around 6 in the evening, when the light outside takes on a grayish color, and the shapes of things start to blend with the coming night. She was about to close the window that faced the big chamomile tree, the one that stood at the far end of the lot like an old watchman. As she reached for the window to shut it, she glanced outside and saw, standing beside the tree, the same lady dressed in white. This time, the woman looked as if she was peeking toward the house, her posture suggesting she was watching or observing, not just passing by. My mother leaned forward a little to get a better look, wanting to be sure that her eyes were not playing tricks on her, but she only had a second or two to focus before the figure disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only the ordinary image of the tree and the open ground. There were no footsteps, no signs of someone running away, just one moment of seeing and the next moment of emptiness. Those 2 episodes bothered my mother deeply, but she tried to carry on with her daily tasks, pushing the fear to the back of her mind because there were already so many problems to worry about. However, not long after those encounters, she fell ill. At first, it was just coughing and tiredness. Then the coughing grew worse and more frequent. She started to cough out blood. Seeing that terrified all of us. We were already living in misery, struggling to meet our basic needs, and now we were faced with the sight of my mother weak and pale, blood on her handkerchief, her body shaking with each cough. My father was distraught, but we had so little money that even getting proper medical care felt like climbing a mountain. It was at that point that my aunt, my mother's older sister, came to our rescue. She saw the condition we were in, and could not bear to leave us there any longer. She convinced my parents to leave that place and to live with her for a while, where we would at least have food and proper shelter. She offered to help with my mother's recovery and to give my father time to figure out what to do next. So my parents agreed. My siblings and I were sent under our grandparents' care, where things were simpler and more stable, while my parents stayed with my aunt. We left the wooden house under the chamomile tree behind, along with all our pain and confusion, but not everything could be taken out of that place. My father was very worried about our belongings. We did not have much, but the things we did have meant something to us and had value. He could not just abandon them completely. So my mother's younger brother, my uncle, and one of my father's friends agreed to look after the house and our things for a while. My uncle stayed there for about 2 weeks. During that time, he slept in the house, walked around the land, and tried to keep things in order. Everything seemed manageable at first. Then, suddenly, one evening, he left the house and went back to my grandmother's place. When he arrived, he said that he was not feeling well. He believed that he was having one of his usual asthma attacks. He had suffered from asthma for a long time, so the feeling of tightness in his chest and difficulty breathing was not new to him. My grandparents, used to dealing with his condition, watched over him and tried to help. But that night turned out to be very different from all his previous attacks. The whole night went very badly. My grandmother stayed up beside him, watching him closely, unable to rest because she could feel that something was wrong. Past midnight, while the house was dark and most of us were asleep, I suddenly woke up to the sound of my uncle's voice. It was loud and eerie, nothing like his normal speech. He sounded as if he was trapped in a terrible nightmare. He shouted, his voice raw and strange, saying things that did not fully make sense. My grandmother kept shaking him, trying to wake him, calling his name, but he was unconscious, his body moving and twisting as if held down by some invisible weight. Minutes passed like that, full of fear and helplessness, until finally he seemed to calm down and opened his eyes. He came back to his senses and looked around, confused, having no memory of what had just happened. He had no idea he had been shouting or that he had frightened us. My grandparents decided they could not take any chances and chose to bring him to the hospital. They got him ready, helped him into whatever transport they had, and hurried through the early morning darkness. But halfway to the hospital, my uncle went unconscious again. This time, he did not come back. By the time they reached the hospital, the doctors could no longer do anything for him. He was pronounced dead on arrival. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. While all of that was happening, something strange was also taking place back at the wooden house under the kametsile tree, where my father's friend had stayed behind that night. He had chosen to sleep in the auto repair shop area in front of the house instead of inside, maybe because it felt less heavy there or maybe because he wanted to be close to the highway. Around 4 in the morning, the very same time when my uncle was dying on the way to the hospital, my father's friend woke up to a strange noise coming from inside the house. At first, he did not understand what he was hearing. As he listened, he realized that there was a flickering light coming from the house, as if someone was turning the lights on and off quickly or as if candles were burning in an unsteady way. Along with the light, he heard sounds, many sounds, as if unknown creatures were having some kind of wild party inside. He heard utensils banging together, like plates and spoons and pots being struck again and again, and scratching on the wooden walls, as if claws or nails were dragging across the boards. The sounds did not match the empty state of the house. There was no one there who should have been making that noise. He lay there, listening in fear, unable to move, trying to make sense of what was happening. Only later, when he learned that my uncle had died at exactly that hour, did he connect the two events and realize how strange it all was, as if something had been claimed from the house and announced itself through that terrible, invisible celebration. A few days later, after my uncle's death and my father's friend's frightening experience, my parents finally went back to that house with the firm decision to remove all of our belongings and abandon the place completely. They could not bear to leave things there anymore, not after everything that had happened, not after losing goats, health, money, and now a family member. My mother later recalled that when they returned that day, the whole place felt eerie. The afternoon was unusually quiet. There were no birds singing, no goats bleating, no normal sounds of life. The wind was blowing, but instead of feeling warm or gentle, it was cold and sharp, like fingers sliding over the skin. The kametsile tree stood as it always had. But now it seemed less like a guardian and more like a witness to things that we would never fully understand. They gathered our things as quickly as they could, moving with a kind of heavy silence, and when they were done, they left the house behind for good, leaving the land to whoever or whatever might remain there. About a week after my uncle's death, another strange and tragic incident took place right in front of that lot. According to the news, a taxi cab was driving along the highway when something unexpected happened. The driver suddenly lost control of the vehicle and the cab went tumbling, rolling over right in front of the land we had once called home. When people rushed to see what had caused the accident, and when the story spread, it was said that the driver had lost control because a lady dressed in white had suddenly come out from the bushes on the side of the road and crossed the highway without warning. He had tried to avoid hitting her, swerving too suddenly, and that movement caused the vehicle to flip. Hearing that story, after everything we had already been through, the goats dying, my father's business failing, my mother seeing a woman in white near the kametsile tree, her falling sick and coughing out blood, my uncle dying at 4 in the morning while strange noises filled the house, and then a lady in white causing an accident right in front of that same land. It was hard not to feel that there was something on that property that did not want us there, something that had always been there. Under the old tree and in the long grass, something watching, waiting, and sometimes showing itself in ways that brought only fear and loss. I started seeing and feeling strange things when we were still living in Pangasinan, and sometimes when I look back, I feel like everything really began when my sister died, as if her death opened some kind of door in my life that I never asked to open but could never fully close again. Before she left us, we shared a room. It was our room, our shared little space where we laughed, fought over small things, told secrets, and stayed up late talking about nonsense and dreams. After she died, people would probably think it became my room, but in my heart it always stayed like it was ours, like she never completely left it. I could feel her there in ways that went beyond memory. The air did not feel empty. The room always had this strange weight, like someone else was still sharing the space with me, someone I could not see but could feel, especially at night, when the house had gone quiet and everyone else was already asleep. Sometimes the lights would turn off by themselves, even when I knew I had just switched them on properly. At first, I thought it was just faulty wiring or a loose bulb, so I told myself not to panic. But it kept happening, not just once or twice, but many times, always when I was alone or when I was already trying to fall asleep. There were moments when I was lying on my bed and suddenly felt the movement of the upper deck, as if someone had just climbed onto the top bunk and lay down quietly. The mattress would dip slightly, the wooden frame would creak softly the same way it did when my sister used to lie there. I would stare at the ceiling, my heart beating fast, thinking that if I just turned my head, I might see her legs hanging over the side or hear her breathing. But I never had the courage to look. There were nights when I could hear footsteps on the stairs, slow and familiar, like the sound of someone walking up to our room, and I would hold my breath because in my mind, it felt so much like her nightly routine. Part of me wanted to believe she was really visiting, that she was just there making sure I was not lonely. But another part of me was terrified because I knew that in the normal sense, she was gone. The morning after we got the news that she was dead, when the grief was still fresh and raw, my mother had her own experience that made the house feel even stranger. That day, while the rest of us were downstairs, trying to process what had happened and discussing what we needed to do for her burial, my mother was alone upstairs in her room. Her room was separate from ours, but the stairs and hallway connected the spaces, and from downstairs we knew that no one had gone up except her. After a short while, my mother came down, and I remember her face clearly because it had gone pale, the color drained from it like she had seen something that made her blood run cold. She asked us, "Me galing ba sa inyo sa tas kanina?" Which means, "Did any of you come from upstairs earlier?" We answered honestly, telling her, "Wala. Kanina pa kami dito sa baba." Meaning, "No, we've been here downstairs the whole time." When she heard that, her expression changed even more. She looked shaken, and her eyes turned glassy. Then she told us what she had seen. She said that while she was in her room, she happened to look toward the direction of the television set. The TV was turned off, so the screen acted like a dark mirror. In that reflection, she saw a woman wearing white, standing by the stairs, facing away from her, as if slowly walking down the steps with her back turned. She described the dress, simple and white, and the long hair hanging down. She really thought at first that it was one of us or someone who had gone upstairs without her noticing, so she did not panic then. But when we told her no one had been up there, it hit her that maybe it was not any of us at all. That realization made her sit down, and all of us started crying again, because in our hearts we felt that maybe it was my sister making her presence known somehow. During the 9 days following her death, the traditional period when people usually hold a wake and pray for the soul of the one who passed, the house felt even heavier and more filled with unexplainable things. One night, my brother, my uncle, our housemaid, and I were in the living room. The atmosphere in the house had been very quiet and sad, almost suffocating, so we decided to play some music to break the silence, to make it feel more normal and less like a place waiting for something terrible to happen. We turned the radio on. At first, everything was fine. The music played softly, filling the space, and we tried to distract ourselves with small talk. Then, without anyone touching it, the volume of the radio started to go down slowly, as if an invisible hand was turning the knob. All of us froze and looked at each other, silently asking if anyone had done it, but everyone's hands were visible. Before we could fully react, we heard the sound of a woman crying. The cry sounded like it was coming from outside the door, but at the same time it felt like it was echoing all over the house, seeping into the walls, filling the room and wrapping around our bodies. It was not a gentle cry. It was full of pain, the kind of sound someone makes when they cannot accept something terrible that has happened to them. We sat there stunned, not sure if we should move or stay still. Then the radio suddenly began to tune up again, the volume rising back and even shifting through stations as if someone was spinning the dial, and the woman's crying slowly faded away until it was gone. I was scared, but at the same time, I could not stop my own tears from falling. I thought about my sister, and imagined that maybe it was her, crying because she could not accept that her life had ended so suddenly, crying because she did not want to leave us yet. After that, I tried to go on with life as normally as possible, but her presence did not stop there. One day, I was in the bathroom, doing something as simple and ordinary as cleaning up. After I was done, I went to the sink to wash my face. There was a mirror in front of the sink, and like always, I glanced at myself after splashing water on my face, wiping the excess away. At first, I saw my own reflection looking back at me, my wet hair, my tired eyes, my familiar face. Then slowly, almost like something was sliding over my image layer by layer, my reflection began to change. The features in the mirror shifted gently until I no longer saw myself but saw my sister's face instead. She was looking straight at me, her eyes meeting mine, as if she was truly standing on the other side of the glass, watching me with a quiet, steady gaze. In that moment, I felt like my head was swelling, like something was pressing outward from the inside. Goosebumps crawled up from my arms to my neck and then up my scalp. The whole thing lasted only for a few seconds, maybe around 5, but it felt much longer while it was happening. Then, just like that, the image changed back, and I saw myself again, my own face where hers had been. I could not move. I felt numb, and my legs felt weak. I slowly reached for the bathroom door, opened it carefully as if something else might be waiting outside, and walked out. As soon as I was in the hallway, away from the mirror, the shock gave way to emotion. And I just broke down and cried. Even after that, things continued to happen around me that kept my fear and sadness alive. There were nights when I would lie in bed and hear someone crying softly somewhere in the house, just before I fell asleep, like a faint background sound that tethered my thoughts to the memory of my sister. There were times when I heard the sound of chairs moving downstairs, dragging against the floor, as if someone was pushing them around without caring how much noise they made, even though everyone should have been sleeping. Once, I saw a man wearing white in the kitchen. I thought it might be my imagination playing tricks on me because of the things I had already experienced, but when I mentioned it to our housemaid, she said she had seen the same figure too. The realization that I was not the only one seeing these things made it harder to dismiss them. It made me feel like our house was truly somewhat haunted, not just by my sister but by other presences as well. Sometimes, when I sat in the living room, I would look toward the stairs and see children sitting there, just sitting quietly, their forms small and still. If I looked too long, they seemed to fade or disappear, but their images stayed in my mind. Our house was an apartment type, with 2 units. We were occupying the last door at the far end, and the first door, the one closer to the front, had been empty ever since my uncle moved out, and no one else decided to rent it. That empty apartment never felt truly empty though. Our neighbors sometimes made comments like, "Parang ang daming tao sa bahay niyo," which means, "It seems like there are a lot of people in your house." They would say it when they passed by, hearing sounds or seeing shadows through the window, but we knew that in reality, there were only a few of us living there. Every time I passed that first door, I could feel something heavy in the air, like a group of unseen eyes was staring at me from inside. The feeling was so strong that it made my chest feel tight. Even without seeing anything, I felt unwelcome, like I was walking in front of a crowd that did not want me near them. One particular moment with that empty unit left a strong mark on me and taught me a hard lesson. One day, my aunt was outside washing clothes. We were very close, and I did not like leaving her alone, so I stayed with her and kept her company while she worked. Near that area, inside the first door of the apartment, there was an old radio. The place felt extra quiet that day, and the silence made the heavy feeling from that unit seem even worse, so I decided to turn the radio on to make things feel lighter. I thought that playing some music would break the tension and lessen the heaviness I always felt coming from that house. I went inside, turned on the light, and walked toward the radio. Just before I switched it on, I said out loud, half joking and half trying to be brave, Wala namang multo. Booty kung magparamdam. Which roughly means, there are no ghosts. It would be good if they showed themselves. I said it in a challenging tone, not fully believing anything would happen, trying to sound like I was not afraid. Looking back, I regret those words so much. It was as if something heard me. After I turned the radio on and started looking for a working station, I suddenly felt like I was not alone anymore. The air changed. I felt that someone was sitting on the stairs inside the apartment. The feeling was so real that my body reacted before my mind did. When I looked toward the stairs, I did not see a full figure, but I saw a pair of feet quickly running up the steps, as if some invisible person had been sitting there, and had decided to flee higher up when I looked. My entire body went cold, and I froze for a second, my heart pounding loudly in my ears. Then my legs kicked into motion, and I walked out as fast as I could, not daring to run in case running made things worse. When I stepped outside, I realized that my aunt, who had been washing clothes near the faucet, was no longer there. She had gone inside our house without telling me, as if she too had felt that something was wrong or did not want to stay outside anymore. I hurriedly followed her into the house, my fear now mixing with the need to tell someone what I had just seen. I told my parents what happened, tears rolling down my face as I tried to describe everything, but they did not believe me. Maybe they thought I was just scared because of all the stories and my grief, or maybe they did not want to accept that something unseen might be reacting to us. Whatever their reasons, they brushed it off, and I was left feeling alone with the memory of those feet running up the stairs. From that day onward, I made myself a promise. I would never again challenge something unseen, never again dare spirits or forces I do not understand to show themselves. That experience taught me that some things are better left alone. But the scariest part of my experiences came later, when I started my training in Eastwood. Around that time, I began to have a lot of bangangat, or sleep paralysis nightmares, but these were not just ordinary bad dreams. They felt deeper, darker, and more personal, like someone was deliberately trying to get to me when my body was most vulnerable. In those episodes, I would see myself lying in bed, almost as if I were floating outside my body, looking down at my own sleeping form and at the room around me. I could see the surroundings clearly, the walls, the furniture, the way the light from outside slipped in through the window, but I could not move at all. My chest felt heavy, like something was sitting on it, and it was so hard to breathe, like every breath was a small battle. I would try to scream or call out, but no sound would come. At first I thought it was just like the usual sleep paralysis other people talk about, scary but harmless, something that would pass if I just calmed down. But then it became worse. During these bangangat episodes, I started to hear voices in my head. They were not my thoughts, because they did not sound like me at all. They felt like something or someone was speaking to me from somewhere close but hidden. I also started seeing shadows, not just in the dreams but even in real life when I was awake. The shadows would appear in corners, near doors, at the edge of my vision, disappearing when I tried to focus on them. And in my nightmares, there was always one shadow that stood out. It was the figure of a man wearing a long black garment, like a robe or a dress, and he was a bit tall. He did not have a clearly visible face, but I could feel his eyes on me every time he appeared. He was always there in my dreams, standing a short distance away, watching me, and telling me, without moving his mouth, that he would get me. The message was always the same: he wanted me, and he would not stop until he had me. The more these dreams happened, the more afraid I became. There was a period when I had bangangat almost every day, even when I slept in the morning to try to avoid them. It did not matter what time I slept, the nightmares still came. I would go to bed already afraid, tears in my eyes, because I did not know what would happen once I closed them. Every time I felt my body relax and sleep come, a part of me would panic, thinking, what if I do not wake up this time? What if he finally gets me and pulls me somewhere I cannot return from? I told my father about it because I could not bear carrying the fear alone. My father has something like a gift. He has had his own experiences with spiritual things, and my mother has also gone through strange events. They understood that some things cannot be easily explained and are not just dreams or imagination. One time, I was sleeping in their bed because they wanted to watch over me. My father sat beside me and started to pray. He prayed the Apostles' Creed over me, saying the words out loud, asking for protection, for deliverance, for peace. But he later told me that while he was praying, he felt like something was trying to stop him. He kept losing his focus, as if the prayer was breaking apart in his mouth. He had to repeat it again and again because it kept getting interrupted in ways he could not explain. My husband and I also tried to pray it together, hoping that praying as a pair would make it stronger, but we felt the same resistance. It was as if something did not want us to finish the prayer. Because of that, I decided to write the prayer down so I could read it slowly and carefully, making sure I did not forget any words. When I prayed that way, reading each line deliberately, I would feel a sense of relief once I reached the end. It was not a complete solution, but it gave me a little bit of strength to fight the fear. Then, one early morning, around 4:30 a.m., something happened that made everything even more unsettling. I woke up because I heard my husband talking in his sleep. At first, I thought he was just murmuring or dreaming, so I ignored it for a few seconds. But then I realized that what he was saying was not in a language I understood. It was not Zambil, which he speaks, and it was not English either. It sounded like completely different words, a strange language I had never heard him use before. It scared me, because it was too clear to be random mumbling. It sounded like structured speech. I tried to wake him up. It was hard at first. He seemed deep in whatever he was experiencing, but eventually, he stirred and opened his eyes. I asked him what his dream had been about. He told me that, in his dream, the thing that had been bothering me, the one that gave me nightmares, had come again. He said, "Yung gamugilo sayo. Binabangungat ka da yulit kaya nag pray akoing our Father." Which means, the one that's disturbing you. You were having a nightmare again, so I prayed the Our Father. When he said that, something inside me sank. It felt like confirmation that whatever had been haunting my sleep was not just a shadow in my own mind. It was something real enough that even in his dream, my husband knew it was there and tried to pray for me. What really bothered me, though, was the fact that he had been praying the Our Father in a language he does not know. He only knows Zambil and English, nothing else, so how could he have been praying in a different language while asleep? The thought that something might be speaking through him or guiding his words was frightening. At the same time, it made me grateful that he was trying to help me, even in his sleep. I am not really surprised anymore that this thing, this presence, this man in black from my dreams, still tries to bother me. I know, deep down, that he is still out there somewhere, watching, waiting for moments of weakness, looking for chances to slip into my sleep again. But I also know something else just as strongly, that God is with us. I might feel fear. I might sometimes feel like I am losing the battle when the nightmares return or when I sense something in the room. But I cling to the belief that I am not really alone, that there is a stronger presence beside me that he can never defeat. And as long as I keep praying, even if I have to struggle to form the words, even if I have to write them down and read them when my mouth and mind feel blocked, I know that I am fighting back. And I trust that in the end, God will not let him take me.